Salve, hello. This is Evan Milner here, Molendinarius, from the Latinum Institute. And in this video, I want to talk to you a little bit about what is Latinum and what is the Latinum Institute. Latinum was started originally in 2006 as a podcast at a time when there was very little Latin audio available of irregular quality, especially in what's known as the restored classical pronunciation of Latin. And because there is some dispute about exactly how to pronounce, and also the Latin-speaking community is very fastidious about these matters, people were leery. They were put off from the idea of producing Latin audio and putting it out in public. So what I decided to do was to produce the Latinum Podcast and then ask people in the academic world to critique my pronunciation. And I did this for a couple of years, working very hard to improve my Latin pronunciation in the restored classical pronunciation of Latin. Eventually, the hosting service that was hosting the Latinum Podcast that allowed me to provide the material for free went under during the financial crisis. And I moved my material across to payloads where it could be accessed and purchased item by item. So individual DVDs and CDs and downloads. And that was quite an expensive way to access my material, especially as over the years I have now accumulated a very large audio library in Latin. Patreon came online a couple of years ago, and I realized this would be a very good way to make my entire audio catalog accessible. So for a subscription, you can access everything, which means that you get an enormous amount of material, and this is extremely good value for money. On Latinum, at the Latinum Institute, you will find complete Latin audio courses. There are several of these. The primary one, it took me 2 years to complete, is an audio course based on George Adler's A Practical Grammar of the Latin Language. And this is an extremely good audio course, although it is rather dry, based on question and answer sequences. So not quite conversational, and not quite literary. And it goes through in extreme detail the fundaments of Latin. That course alone, if you were to apply yourself to it, would take 2 to 3 years for a dedicated student to complete. In addition, there's a lot of auxiliary material, Comenius's material, which is still being produced, and a number of audiobooks at various levels of ability. So there's a lot to do if you want to learn Latin at Latinum, which will make your life very easy. The hard slog has been done for you. The Latinum Institute on its YouTube channel also has a Hebrew course, and it has handwriting courses and various other bits and pieces, a little bit of French and a little bit of French Latin. I have Henri Ollendorff's original French Latin textbook, which preceded Adler's version. Adler's textbook isn't original. It's a rewrite of Henri Ollendorff's not serial and oral method, but a new method of learning languages, a practical method. And this, in turn, was a somewhat inferior, in my view, attempt to take the system invented by Jean Manesca for French. And I've also done some recordings based on Jean Manesca's serial and oral French course and produced something similar to it for Latin, re-engineering Adler so that it's closer to the idea originally promulgated by Jean Manesca. The reason why such a thing has never been published is that it would be very large, not compendious at all, but expansive. and thus I've produced them as audio courses. They are eminently suited and were originally designed as audio courses to be taught in a classroom by a teacher. So the hard work of taking the textbook and turning it into an audio course was already done a long time ago. The Adler textbook I discovered myself, and it is now quite widely used by people learning Latin, with or without my audio course. The audio course is not just a read through of the textbook. Every time there's a paradigm, I give it in full. There's a lot of additional material in the audio course that's not in the textbook. So the audio course is much larger than the textbook, and the textbook itself, of course, is rather large. So that's what is at the Latinum Institute. Audiobooks, more audiobooks, and even more audiobooks. At the moment, I am recording Casserly's Latin prosody, which is a technical book on the structure of Latin verse and prose. Not the most exciting, but this was a core textbook in the 1800s, published in 1845. The version I have, the edition is 1845. I'm not sure when the first edition was. And I'm also working on Castellio's Latin Psalms and various other bits and pieces as time permits. So if you're interested in learning Latin, then I would highly recommend you go to latinum.org.uk and subscribe to Latinum, where you can access the materials. Vale, goodbye.